Shaun Fuchs. Welcome to Life in a Garden Online. It's fabulous to have you here. We've been talking a bit this past week. Can you hear me?
We have indeed. Yes, we have indeed.
Yes, and you are a very interesting character. Why does a person become a school teacher?
Is that a question?
That is a question. That is a really, really serious question.
You know, so many times I think I've been asked that question of why did you become a teacher, and by my students and friends and that. And I think being a teacher is just something that's in your DNA. You just know that that's what you want to do. And it's not, it's not because you like children or you kind of enjoy, a classroom environment. It's just something you need to do. And as much as I initially wanted to go into law school, as you kind of probably read in the early chapters, my choice was ultimately going into teaching at JCE and WITS. And it was just so natural for me to be a teacher. So and so many teachers I know are the same.
So it's a calling.
I think it is, yes. It's you bump into people that are sort of in medicine or in professions that, and there are very few professions left, or there are very few sort of callings that I think can call themselves professionals. But I think teaching still is to a large extent. And it is a calling, yes.
Okay. See, that was a really good answer. It wasn't a complicated question. Now the big stuff starts.
Oh.
What's for supper? No. Shaun.
Can I tell you, so also to everyone who's joined us, Mandi Friedman in my class would have been sitting right in the front. She would have not been able to say a thing, which is literally impossible. And it has been one of the most interesting and fascinating build-ups to an interview that I've had, and I've absolutely loved it. What a character.
Shaun, I probably would have been sitting in the front of the class.
You would have started in the back, you would have ended up in the front, and you would have gone to the back again.
I was so well behaved at school. I wouldn't say I was a goody-goody. I wasn't a goody-goody, but I hated school. I absolutely loathed school. I don't know. Primary school was fantastic. I loved primary school. It was just, I grew up at Orange Grove. I went to Orange Grove Primary. Does that explain a whole lot to you? Okay.
I was an 8 Jack for a year.
Oh, what are you? Nice Jewish school.
Down the road. My first Jewish friend ever was Terence Bloom.
Oh, is he still blooming?
I don't know.
Yeah, but my friends were all Lebanese, Portuguese, Italian. And then from there I went to Northview, and that was primarily Jewish. It was such a culture shock, I cannot begin to tell you. It was like, oh God, I can't cope with this. And ended up in Sandringham after 6 months. So that's when the hell started. At least Northview was fun. Sandringham was a nightmare. And I certainly don't understand why anybody becomes a teacher. So I couldn't wait to get out of school and go and do something completely different. But yes, I probably would have been sitting in the front of the class because you would have had to wake me up. No, you taught history. I loved history.
Yep.
I would have been your best student.
You had a good teacher, am I right?
I had 2 good teachers.
And that is so common. That is so often the case. I mean, right in the beginning, I acknowledge some teachers that had a massive influence on my own life. And one of them was Gail Mervis, who was my history teacher, and she was absolutely phenomenal. And really, I always loved history, but she inspired me so much. And I often say to people, we're at dinner parties or whatever it is, and they'll say, find out I'm a history teacher, and they'll say, oh, I loved history or I hated it. If you hated it, I'll say immediately you had a terrible history teacher. If you loved it, exactly what I've said to you, you had a wonderful history teacher.
Yeah, and it's just a subject that the right teacher can bring to life. All right, the one teacher was a stoner. She used to sit on her chair with her legs crossed and talk to our class with her eyes closed. But I loved her for her wackiness and but she was still a good teacher. And the other one was a traditional teacher, but she was also fabulous. And did you ever hear about Mrs. Wilson at Northview? She used to run out of space on the board, and then she used to teach maths, and then start writing on the blackboard, on the wall, like going down the wall. And then the one day she picked up a desk and threw it at a pupil. She would clap you with those, that compass, you know, those wooden compasses?
Those were the days.
Yes, the good old days. Weren't those the good old days when you could still jack a kid and tell them to shut up and go to the back of the class? Anyway, let's talk about you right now, because you are the spotlight person at the moment. Can we go right back to a young Shaun? Can you tell us a little bit about your folks and where you come from?
So originally born in Benoni and grew up there, and unbelievable how since I've published the book, how many people have said to me that their roots originate from sort of Benoni, but it makes sense because forgive the history teacher coming out now. The East Rand, certainly in its time in the 50s and 60s and 70s, one of the biggest industries was mining. And there were huge mining communities that were established out there. So it made sense that a lot of people actually came from the East Rand and from Benoni. My dad was born in 1920. His father was of German origin, and the family had moved out from Germany sort of just before the First World War. And he met my mom in the early 60s and was much older. So he was 42 and she was 20. And my gran wouldn't let them get married because she said he was this old fox. And the irony being that Fuchs is the German, the translation into English means fox. And my dad and my mom waited until she turned 21. And literally, I think it was 10 days later, they got married and had the most amazing marriage for right up until his passing at the age of 93 in 2013. So, you know, we grew up with two incredible parents. My father had his own engineering business in the 60s. My mom worked from home. She sort of did the slimming, which was sort of this, almost today we call it electromuscular stimulation. And it's this, she called it a slimming salon. So she had all the who's who of Boksburg and Benoni. That sounds weird saying.
It was in terms, sorry.
And I talk about this again in the book because we had this massive plot in Boksburg where we stayed, and on our one side was a surgeon, one of the top surgeons sort of in Johannesburg at that time, and on the other side was Dr. Vosloo, who was the member of parliament for Boksburg, and Vosloo Rus was named after him. So we were in this really incredible community at the time, and all these people used to come to my mom's slimming salon, and they'd put these pads on, and there'd be these electric kind of these impulses, and it would sort of confuse the muscle, thinking it was a brain sending a pulse through and stimulate it, and it'd almost be like a workout. So she ran that, which was amazing, because the irony is that about a month ago, Gordon and I bought a Body 20 franchise, which does the exact same thing. It's sort of a 20-minute workout, which is equivalent to 4 to 6 hours of workout in a gym. So gyms have followed me my whole life, because at the same time, my dad was very much into fitness and bodybuilding and had the most incredible physique. And he then sold the engineering business and bought health studios in Hillbrow, American Health Studio, and International Health Studio in Rissik Street in Johannesburg in the 70s. And I think he was probably ahead of his time in terms of his thinking, because the likes of Health and Racket, eventually Virgin Active, Planet Fitness, really came into their own into the 90s, you know. So he was probably 20 years ahead of his time in terms of what he was doing. But we grew up in the gyms, and I mean, that's how I ended up doing powerlifting, and still have always had this interest in fitness all my life. Did
your dad go to war?
So he was, yes. So he was in, you know, he was obviously 19 when the Second World War broke out. He was a sapper, so in the engineering corps. His brother was in active service, my uncle Oswald, and he was served in the Natal Carbineers and was eventually in an armored vehicle and was captured in Tobruk and then
Oh,
taken
fantastic.
to war. And interesting, when I was in Standard 6 in Grenville, in Rustenburg, I got a book from the library and I read it. And my uncle escaped from the Italian prisoner of war camp. And he escaped to Switzerland and then joined a jazz band and played
Oh,
out the rest
fantastic.
of the band in Switzerland. And then, but interestingly, when I was reading it, the guy that wrote the book, the author, had escaped with two other people, one being a South African named Oswald, and it was actually my uncle. So I mean, it was incredible.
Small world, huh?
Yeah.
My dad was 15, I think, when the war broke out, and he forged his mom's signature on the papers and went to join the army and then came home 7 years later. So his mother wasn't very impressed. Yeah, he was 8th Infantry. They were in Egypt and Alexandria and all of Ethiopia and all the way up there under Montgomery. It's a pity. Did your dad talk about it? And did your uncle talk about it? Because my father refused to talk about it.
My dad never really spoke much about it. And my uncle, sadly, I never had a relationship with him, or other than knowing kind of the stories that my dad told. So my uncle was more in the active service. My dad, being an engineer and a sapper, they kind of constructed bridges and built things. So he didn't really, I don't think he had that much of an active service.
Shaun, and then you went to Jeppe Boys. I know that when I was growing up, Jeppe was considered quite a rough school, and the boys were a bit rough, eh?
Yes. So I always say to people that my folks, after I left Jeppe, spent an inordinate amount of money for me to correct my elocution, which I hope I've done well. Because whenever I go back to Jeppe, it immediately, but no, lekker, that's Kif. I can't believe, So the accent changes completely. And I actually was invited in 2015 as the guest speaker at the matric valediction, because it was my 30 years from when I matriculated from 1985. And I made a point of saying, and I started off with my Jeppe accent. And the joke, no one laughed. So nobody laughed. I was like, this is supposed to be funny, because whenever I used to do that when I was teaching at Crawford or where I went to another school or whatever it was, people laughed because of the accent. But when I spoke to the Jeppe Boys, no one laughed. I was like, hang on. Okay, well, of course, because we all speak like that. It doesn't matter. I mean, 30 years later, everyone still has the same accent. It was very similar to, I think, guys that came from Highlands North.
Yeah,
boys,
Highlands North, eh? I'm a Highlands boy.
Down the road, So yeah, Jeppe was it was a school my dad wanted us to go to. He's one of his very close friends that he had always met in the pub, Alfie. I called that chapter Alfie's Blazer, and Alfie always wore his Jeppe blazer. My dad thought, if Alfie had a bit of a respect for and he liked him, and he thought, if Alfie rates the school, then it's got to be a good school. So we actually moved to Kensington so that my older brother Garth, and I could go to Jeppe. And I loved my time there. I had had an interesting conversation a week ago with Sam Cowan, because, her book, Brutal School Ties, from Parktown Boys, the Parktown Boys story.
Yeah.
It wasn't my experience. That wasn't my experience at all. That actually was my experience for my Standard 6 year when I was at Grenville. So I was at Grenville in Rustenburg for a year in boarding school. And then I went to Jeppe for my Standard 7, my grade 9 year in 1982. And my year at Grenville was way rougher than it certainly was at Jeppe. Jeppe, yes, it was a tough school. The boys were tough. It was a tough environment. The environment was very different. And we did things. We did it hard. We did it tough. But it wasn't an environment for me that I was victimized or bullied or anything like that.
Maybe you're just not the type to get victimized or bullied. Some people just project this aura that you can't, they won't let you. Do you think that's who you are?
I've often said I've never been intimidated by anyone my entire life. The only person that ever intimidated me was my father, but in a good, positive way. It wasn't in a negative way at all. And I really, yes, as a standard 6 in Grenville High School, it was tough. But I don't think I allowed those seniors who bullied us and absolutely victimized us to intimidate me. And certainly as I got into JEPI and as I continued my kind of life journey along the way through to WITS and through to the army and that, I never allowed anyone to intimidate me. And I think it's just the way I was. It was just the way I was wired.
So what inspired you to go on and become a school teacher? Or who, should I say, inspired you?
So I had this idea that I'd go into law. And remember, this is 1984, my standard 9 year, grade 11, 1985, my matric year. And it was the day, it was the height, it was the height of LA law. Remember that? Wow, that's amazing. I want to be a lawyer. And of course I loved history. So history, I think, is the most natural subject for any lawyer to sort of take. And we were on a rugby camp in April, the Easter holiday, and we were doing some training, and it was down in the South Coast, and I was going for, and my rugby coach at the time, Dave Pitcairn, who was also the science teacher, we're chatting while we were running along the South Coast, and he was saying, what are you going to do next year? And I said, well, I think about law. And he said, well, you would be the most brilliant teacher. And that sort of struck a chord. And I thought, well, actually, I love Dave. He was a massive inspiration to me. He was a mentor. He was just one of those teachers that I absolutely loved. And I took a lot of his lessons and have carried them through my career. And I thought, actually, that's not a bad idea. I could actually enjoy teaching. And the irony is I got accepted into teaching with a full scholarship. Whereas in terms of law, there was no ways I was going to get a scholarship as a first year student in those days. You wouldn't get a scholarship or a bursary at all. So I got a full bursary as a teacher. I had money left over, which was unbelievable. I opened a Perm Blue Book bank account, savings account. Do you remember the Perm Blue Book?
Yeah, I remember those books. I had an allied one in red.
Exactly. So if some of our guests tonight are going, oh, I remember that. I know exactly how old you are and where you come from. I could say things like NBS or Allied or Trust Bank, It's like dirty talk in banking.
Yeah, more dirty talking bank is to date the bank manager of Allied. Those are the days.
So I don't know how we got onto banking, but anyway, I got a scholarship and
that's out.
I got a scholarship, and so it was natural for me to go into BITS and go become a teacher. And I have to apologize if you're hearing a rain sound. It is. I mean, we're in the middle of one of those beautiful sort of Western Cape Pringle Bay storms. So I hope it's not overpowering the sound.
No, it's absolutely fine. As the rave washes you away.
Yep.
Oh, now I've lost my track of thought. That happens quite often. Being over 50 is a problem. Shaun, you actually had a party at UJ.
Yeah, I did. I did. I went in I went into Res and was quite entrepreneurial as well. So I started a mobile disco, and what's so interesting when I tell my students of late, just before I stood down as head, when I was still teaching a bit as well, I said I had a mobile disco. They're like, what is that? What is that? A mobile disco is a mobile disco. No. So you mean you were a DJ? So we spoke about mobile disco, but anyway, I started a mobile disco, and we got the contracts to do all the razzles at JCE, And those razzles were infamous because we had nurses res on the one side, we had JCE reses, the 3 reses from JCE, we had Sunnyside Women's Res from Wits, and then we had the Wits guys. So we had the most unbelievable parties in the student union, and I mean, I have such fond memories of those, and writing through those chapters was wonderful because I remembered all the music because I played it, you know. And a
And
friend
you
of
still
mine,
do.
I still do, and a friend of mine who read that chapter, he sent me a message, a WhatsApp, and he said, you know, I was loving your book until you said that Rick Astley was amazing.
At least he was only a one-hit wonder, okay?
They were great hits. I loved them.
Yeah, that music was fabulous. The 80s, the music was awesome. I remember dancing at the Underground, you know, the Chelsea Underground and Alex's Bar, and there was a
Thunderdome.
Oh, the Thunderdome was too big. The Thunderdome was just too big and too noisy and whatever. But there was a lovely, seedy little club at the Ambassador Hotel downstairs. We went down a flight of stairs. I actually dated the DJ from there. He had his name was Rodney, but he had Rottweilers, so we used to call him Rodney. Yeah, he was quite sweet. I think he lives in Australia today, probably married and bald and whatever. But we're digressing again. I'm just trying to work out how I never came to a razzle at UJ. I just don't understand it. I mean, we used to go all the
JCE, not UJ.
Oh, JCE. Sorry, I'm with the, you know, I'm staying up to date. You know, sorry about that. A friend of mine used to go to JCE in those years. I mean, I used to drop her. We used to go jolling, and then I used to drop her at college the next morning, you know, straight from the jaw.
That sounds very familiar.
In the days when we could. I mean, could you imagine doing that today? I'd be in recovery for 3 days.
My nephew, who is 16, turning 17 in 2 months' time, lives with Gordon and I. He's been staying with us since he was 14. And weekends he goes and stays with his mom, my sister. And I gave him a copy of the book when it came out. And of course, he read the chapters, the early chapters from my matric, jollying at the end of matric to my varsity days and that. And now whenever I try and reprimand him on something, he just quotes from the chapters, which is just disempowering. I'm like, if you write a book, you know, people say, what advice do you have? If you write a book, never give it to your child, because especially and you haven't been, you've just lived a normal life, I suppose, but the kids don't see it like that.
I think, you know, I can't speak for everybody else, but I think as far as our generation is concerned, I think we had a better youth than the kids today. Their whole life is different, you know, with the electronics and the safety issues and being outdoors and stuff like that. We played outdoors. We got mud in our faces and our mouths, and you know, we didn't have, if you went outside and you came home at sunset. And it's a completely different world, and I actually think we were better off.
Yeah, I do agree with it. I had an interview with the Daily Maverick. Sorry, it was the Get It. Janine will probably correct me. I think it was Get It magazine, and I think it's in the September issue. And they asked sort of, you know, what advice would you have from what you've experienced growing up in the 80s and that, the 70s, 80s, to kids today. And my comment is I agree with you. I think that kids today have so much pressure, and it's such a different environment that I don't know if I would have coped in today's environment, because I loved growing up. It was wonderful. We walked to the shop. We went to the corner cafe. Often it was a Greek family that owned it. And whenever we got there, there was the delivery of fresh bread, and you had that white bread that smelled so amazing, and you just sort of tucked into it without anything on it. You just ripped it out and you ripped it into it. I mean, it was a totally different thing. You went and bought your Wicks, you know, your gum and that sort of thing. So it was so different, and the pressures that are on today are incredible. You know, absolutely incredible. I'm not sure I would have coped.
I don't know how kids today are actually kids. I drive kids well when we have school. I drive kids, you know, from school and extramurals and stuff. And I don't know when they get to be kids because they are so loaded down with homework. I don't ever remember having homework for like 4 or 5 hours a day after school. Unless I just didn't do
Yeah.
it, but I really don't remember it.
I think we didn't do it. And, you know, one of the misperceptions that people often have today is that the syllabus, the curriculum has been dumbed down, and it's not at all. I mean, if I take my subject, history, when I wrote history in matric, it was rote learning. So I learned ABC, and I would literally vomit forth ABC, and that was it. Whereas today, you've got to argue, you've got to analyze, you've got to interpret, you've got different sources, you've got to put off, you know, if your argument is valid and you substantiate it, which is the right way to teach. This is absolutely spot on. And it's so much more interesting, I think, and I really think it's a lot more challenging to a large extent than what we had, if taught correctly. We have one of the most incredible curriculums in the world. The sad part is that we have so many dysfunctional schools that unfortunately the representation on our results is abysmal, you know, but our curriculum and taught properly is unbelievable. It really is.
Is that just at a private level and government as well?
Government as well. There's some government schools that are doing incredible things. I mean, the school I started teaching at, Four Ways High School, is a top school. They are incredibly advanced. They have massive support from the parent body, the governing body. They're doing amazing things with online learning at this point in time. Other schools have just not coped at all. They haven't even managed that, you know.
Yeah. I just think this comment from Angela, this is beginning to sound like a trip down memory lane. Rick Astley, Carlton Ice Drink, Benoni CBD. And those were the days. Yeah, they were. Shaun, you kind of catapulted from teacher to headmaster. That was very quick. So the leader is in you.
I don't think that when I started teaching that I wanted to be a headmaster, you know. I didn't really know what I hadn't planned it in that sense. And the head who appointed me in the beginning, Malcolm Park, who was also an incredible influence on my life and the most amazing mentor and supporter to me, played a huge role in that. And you know, I think he saw the potential, and he saw the fact that I had the potential to be a headmaster, and it also came very naturally for me. So, you know, I went on to the management team as a deputy, and then a senior deputy, and then got the headship of Crawford College Lonehill, which was an incredible school at the time. We had unbelievable results. We were fantastic in sport. And it was a lovely community school. You know, it fed in from the community in the Four Ways, Lonehill, sort of Kyalami area. So becoming a headmaster for me, I think, and no, I don't think, I know, honestly, those were the happiest days of my life. Absolutely the happiest days of my life. I loved it. I was headmaster for 7 years. And I think together with the most incredible team of teachers, parents, students, we created the most wonderful community. Wasn't perfect, of course. There were things that were wrong, but in a large sense, it was a safe environment. Students could be who they wanted to. Their focus was on them as individuals. Teachers could be who they wanted to as individuals, and you maximized everyone's potential. And I think that was really an incredible achievement by the team that I worked with.
Okay, Shamini says, hang on a sec. Not sure that I agree with Shaun on the curriculum. I think kids at school should be taught facts and chronology, and if they go to university, then they can use that knowledge for conceptual discussion. Most kids are trying to tackle complex ideas without the basic knowledge. I'm going to accept that comment, but I don't really want to get into it because it takes us off the focus of our conversation. I'm just kind of putting it out there so you know that the feedback is there. And if we have time later, maybe we can come back to it.
It's an interesting comment, and I don't agree with it. And I love the fact that we can have that comment. And I will tell you why later if we've got some time. But thank you for the comment. I appreciate it.
Shaun, is that it was Morag Reese at Crawford?
Yes, she was at Santon. So when I was
Okay.
head at, she was at the Santon campus.
Okay. Yeah, they were customers in my old shop. It was like her and her husband. Lovely family, really nice. Okay, so then from Crawford we go to Redham, completely different thing, starting from scratch. How did that feel? Because now that's completely different. What's your headspace at that point?
So I'd been head of Loniel for 7 years, and along the way, when I was still deputy, I decided to do my MBA through Rotterdam University Business School, Netherlands, and that sort of put me probably at a unique level because most of the people doing their MBAs were bankers, engineers, business people, and I was the only teacher doing it. And it gave me a competitive edge in the fact that Advitech owned Crawford Schools. Crawford was in the for-profit school environment, and the Advitech enjoyed that. So after I'd served 7 years as head, they'd moved me across to, there was an opportunity to go across to Advitech head office as general manager, and that was for Crawford Schools. And then we did an acquisition of the Centuris Group, Pekinwood College, South Downs and Pretoria, Tiger Valley, and the board stepped down and they'd asked me to run that as general manager, which I did. And at that point, in 2016, the founder of Inspired Schools, which is a global premier school group based in London, had done the acquisition of Redham House in South Africa. So 4 schools, 2 in the Western Cape and 2 in Gauteng. And they'd started growing it. This chap, Nadim Nsuli, had started growing it. And they asked me to take over as managing director. And so that was going to the opposition. And I'd been with Advitech for 17 years as a teacher, deputy, headmaster at a corporate level. And it was a big decision, but I think it was one of the best things that I did in terms of I'd got to a point as head of school where I don't think a head of school should serve longer than 7 years. I think 7 years is a very good time. And I think longer than that, you just get into a comfort zone and you need to do something else, either go to another school, but I don't think you should be in one school for longer than 7 years.
Do you not think that's true of any industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And often you find schools that have leadership where the leadership hasn't changed are often the ones that are the most reluctant to implement change because, well, this is how it's worked, or not all the time. I mean, we have some incredibly dynamic leaders, in the school environment, but often I've found that is the case. They don't enjoy the change. Yeah, so moving to Redham was the opposition was completely different. It was part of a global group, and I'd spent three and a half years there, sort of driving the strategy, opening new schools. We opened a school in Helderfontein, just near Dainfern, which is an incredible campus where it's just got everything that opens and shuts. We opened Ballito, Redham House Ballito, smack bang just past the Ballito Mall, right in the middle of the Ballito, the town, which opened with 360 students, which is
quite amazing for a brand new school.
Absolutely, and it's doing so well. But it's got, and what I loved was that I was able to almost handpick, again with a team, the teachers and the head of the school there, and that was. And that I think has been a large part of the success of that school. And then sort of stepped down and resigned in December of last year. And
boom, a whole new life.
A completely different life that made us into Zoom experts, and our lives are different. I have to make a comment here, and I say this, and again, the history teacher in me comes out, and I say, go to the world we live in today, right now, go to July of 1945 in Europe. July of 1939 in Europe. And that's just before the outbreak of World War II. And then go to July of 1945 at the end of World War II, and how the world had changed in those sort of 6 odd years, almost 7 years, but how the world had changed. For us today, you take March 2020 and take March 2021, and in that 1 year, how incredibly different the world has changed and how we've had to adapt to that. So, when I resigned in December, with the idea of pursuing the book and really getting into schools and talking, because I'd become this corporate animal and I'd lost my passion. I came home for one time and last year in sort of, I think it was about June, and Gordon, my husband, said to me, you've lost your passion. You don't have that energy. You don't have that passion anymore that you had when you were teaching. And I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. And that inspired me to write the book, because I wanted to tell good stories. I wanted to inspire people by reading stories they could relate to, or that we could kind of draw on. And I think the book has done that.
It has absolutely done that.
Thank you. And so with that, I wanted to get into the schools and talk to students, because the book also talks about inclusive communities. It talks about safe places that we create. And we've had so much at the moment of students coming back and challenging their schools, of saying that there was racism, there was homophobia, there was bullying, there was victimization. And often the management teams are totally oblivious to it, So that's what the book was about. And of course, we all got struck by lockdown and COVID, and life has changed. But I think fortunately for me, the book is timeless. So whether I do it this year or whether I do it post-COVID in the new world, I think it's still going to have a very positive and a good message.
Do you think we're going into a better world?
I think the world is what it is. And for everyone, it's a different space. I think certainly the lockdown has pushed every single human being on this planet to a different limit and to a different level. And some incredibly tragically, I mean, again, in the book, I talk about in 1996, Gordon and I started a travel business running school tours. And it was we loved travel. We both loved travel. And we were taking these kids all over. I did it part-time, he did it full-time. And this year he was running it full-time, and he had the busiest and the most successful year that he ever would have this year. And within 2 weeks of lockdown, that business is literally closed down, sadly.
But I think it'll come back.
It will, but when you're running a business and you're employing people and you're getting zero revenue, and people are not going to send their kids on an overseas tour for the next probably 1.5 to 2 years, until there's a vaccine, until it's a safer environment. So companies like that have closed down. So I think it's affected everyone to a large extent.
I must actually introduce you to a guy that we spoke to, I think it's about 2 weeks ago, called Andrew Anderson. I don't know if you've heard about them. They bring kids from overseas to tour South Africa in the game sphere. So there might be something that a lot of you could do together. So he used to be a game ranger. And after about 20 years as a game ranger, politics and things changed, and it wasn't quite what it used to be. And he was looking for another avenue. And then him and his wife started this thing about bringing youngsters, I think from above age of 14, to actually spend a week or 2 weeks here studying the basics of conservation and animal husbandry and all that kind of stuff. So it probably might be a really good tie-in for you. So I'll hook you guys up, and maybe you can look at, doing something like that, because I think they'll open up before we'll open up.
Yeah.
Also, with the pound, they can afford to open up, whereas we actually can't. I think the pound today is 22.65 or something really, really ugly.
Well, £2 buys you a holiday in South Africa for 3 weeks. Almost.
Well, exactly. With change. So what are you actually doing now, Shaun?
So right now I'm
waiting for supper.
Yeah, waiting for supper. I mean, Gordon's got to get it going. He's making excuses at this point. But I'll be in trouble just now. So So there were a couple of projects that I've been busy with. One, we did the acquisition of a Body 20, which is this electromuscular stimulation training. 20 minutes of it is equivalent to 4 to 6 hours in the gym, and it's unbelievable. It's a future of training. It's one-on-one. It's boutique training, and I think it serves a very specific community. So he's driving that and enjoying that and doing very well with that. And then I think part of what came out with the book about the environment that we created in a school and partnering, and then what came out with this whole sort of movement where past students and current students started challenging schools to say, you know, it wasn't a safe space for us. There was discrimination, there was victimization. And I understood that, because often the leadership teams are very focused on certain aspects, and you don't always understand that there are sort of there are issues that develop in a school. So we've partnered. I've started a business called S Squared Innovations, and have partnered with some Dutch partners. And Holland's almost like the Silicon Valley of Europe, and have developed an app which will go to market in January. And the app effectively measures wellness. It quantifies wellness. So it's an incredible piece of technology, and it's designed in 3 phases for students at school, students at university, and people in a work environment. And it's put together obviously using artificial intelligence. There's a team of 16. We spend millions of rands in terms of developing this app, and effectively what it does is the students at school on a weekly basis will answer some questions put together by the app in terms of the AI and the algorithms, but also with the management teams, what they're looking, what trend, what are we looking for, what do we want to test? And on a weekly basis, your students will answer some questions. Those questions get dumped obviously into the technology, the AI, the algorithms, and it then puts onto a dashboard and displays to the Exco team, to your management team, whatever it is, where your students' workers are at. So whether there's massive anxiety, whatever the issues are, you can pick it up. There's sexual harassment, it doesn't matter. It's completely anonymous unless the user chooses to not be. And it makes, it deals with wellness, the wellness of your students and your workers, because I think in today's environment and this post-COVID environment is going to be incredibly different, incredibly stressful. A lot of companies are going to stick to the remote working as well. And how do you know where your people are? How do you know where their wellness is? And for me, once you deal with the wellness, there's all sorts of other positive issues that kind of that go to that, and you can make decisions that are proactive as opposed to being reactive and finding out things. So that's the big project that I'm with doing at the moment.
So are we talking mental wellness, mental health wellness more than physical health wellness, or is it all tied in together?
Mental wellness, and it's an area that I don't. How many organizations deal with that? You don't deal with it. And the moment you can deal with mental wellness, you're going to get a massive return on everything else. You get the positivity, you get the less absenteeism, because you're able to make proactive decisions on where your staff are at.
Too much talk about dinner. I'm off to get that together. Thanks, Shaun. What an interesting journey. We haven't even talked about the journey yet. We should have talked about going to London, because that sounded like a fabulous journey.
It was absolutely crazy. I mean that's 2005, and interestingly, Netflix had just released a documentary, The World's Most Wanted People, and it deals with one of the bombers' wives that was very involved in the plotting of those London bombings in 2005. Also the bombings at the Westgate Mall in Kenya, and my luck, I had 43 or 45 students, left New York, flew across to London, arrived on the Tuesday. The Wednesday we were out and about. London was announced as the host to the 2012 Olympics celebrations, and the Thursday morning the bomb blast took place. And what I managed to trace afterwards was that I was on the very same train that pulled into Liverpool's station on the district line. And as I got off, I ran up to catch my overland train to Stansted. And the first bomb went off because the train pulled out of Liverpool station. And as it went into the tunnel, the first bomber detonated the bomb. And so that chain of events was incredible, because on the train to Stansted, I'd got calls, obviously, from parents, from people in South Africa watching on Sky News. And I didn't really understand what was happening. I had a meeting in Stansted, got to Stansted Airport. Things were kind of getting a bit crazy then. Went to my meeting, which was close by. Halfway through the meeting, said, listen, I've got to get back to London. I've got kids there. And I'd managed to get a SMS at that point in time. There wasn't WhatsApp, to the teachers to say, don't let the students out. But they'd already let 8 students out that morning at 9 o'clock, and the bombs had gone off just before that. And it was so stressful getting back. I bribed a cabbie to take me back because the trains had stopped. There was no transport back to London. And he was so suspicious of me because I had a rucksack. I'd left my home. In New York, I bought a book called Inside 9/11, which was literally unpacking what happened at 9/11, the terrorism. And I took that book with me to read. So the cabbie got a bit suspicious. He took me to a station, told me to wait there. It was started to drizzle at that point. And a couple of minutes later, I was surrounded by Metro Police who wanted to arrest me under Section 44 of the Terrorism Act on the suspicion of being a bomber. And when they searched my bag, they found this book, Inside 9/11. I'm like, what terrorist is going to pack a book called Inside 9/11 in their rucksack? You know, but I didn't.
One who doesn't know his job particularly well.
Exactly, and I did it, and then I've lost a finger. So, you know, when bomb makers, what is the first? They don't have fingers. So I lost the finger. It was hectic. And I eventually managed to persuade them. They did a Scotland Yard clearance. Then I had to get back to London, and I couldn't go any further because all the transport had cut. And I walked. I literally walked 36 kilometers in brand new shoes I'd bought the day before for my meeting, brand new chinos. And I got into London, and by the time I got to the hotel, there were still 2 girls that weren't back from the morning. And the parents were hysterical. I was exhausted. And luckily, at about 8:30 that evening, these girls came skipping down with parcels. They'd been shopping the whole day. There were shops that were still open. Harrods was open. And all hell broke loose from me. I think it was one of the few times I absolutely lost my cool. But it's an incredible chapter, and when you read it, you just can't believe what happens. I mean, there was a comment earlier by one of the viewers about the talks, and one of the talks I actually give is Every Second Counts, and it talks about the events of London and how you don't realize things can happen to you. When you think it can't, it can happen to you. You know, and that's how you need to live life. You know, it can happen. You know, whether it's winning the lotto, we all wish, or whether it's being involved in the middle of a terrorism act, it does happen.
Yeah, right. I think one of the things life shows you is if it's your time to go, it's your time to go. It doesn't matter, you know. I had a staff member, and I had 2 staff members. They're actually, one of them is now no longer with us. They were going home, and they'd reached on Deckers Road, and they were standing right next to each other on the corner, and a taxi lost control. And Arnie tried to pull her out of the way, but the taxi actually hit her, and she got pinned underneath between the taxi and the lamppost. She ended up in hospital, but she was fine afterwards. But it just goes to show that in an instant, things change. Yesterday morning, I saw a guy get knocked off a motorbike. It was one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. But he bounced. As he got off, he jumped. So he didn't end up underneath the motorbike or the taxi or the car that actually hit him off his motorbike. It was very frightening. So things change. So you actually do have to live life like there is no tomorrow.
Yeah, I've learned that.
Was that the end of your statement? Because now I've got to fill in that silence. I've learned that. Shaun, what's a 2-litre milk cost?
2-litre milk?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I suppose it depends where. I think at Woolies at 39 Rand, I think.
Just checking. I was just checking how grounded you are, you see, or if Gordon does the shopping in your house.
No, I do. I think it's 39 Rand.
Why do you shop at Woolworths? Shop at Spar, it's 24 Rand.
I knew I shouldn't have said Woolies.
Checkers. I went to Checkers today. It's much better. Shaun, what advice would you give to anybody who wants to write their memoirs?
In my acknowledgement section of the book at the back, I say that everyone has a book. Every single one of us. There's absolutely nothing that makes me any unique or special to anyone listening to this, or our neighbor, ourselves. It doesn't matter. And we all have incredible stories and journeys. The tough part is doing it. So you really, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. I never told anyone that this was going to happen until it was ready. So people close to me, yes, because I obviously did a lot of research and kind of following up on facts and checking things. And those people knew about it. But for the majority of people were completely surprised when it came out. And I think that's also, how I've also always been, sort of get on and off, but to, write a book. And it's been incredible. I discovered so many things, not only about myself, but about people who are on the journey with me, people who are no longer around that I didn't know. And the response from the book has been unbelievable. I mean, the book has been read all around the world. I have students that live everywhere, from Japan to Canada to the United States, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. And so this book has traveled around the world. It's got read there, passed on to friends, extra books bought, and the feedback has just been incredible. So I've loved that, and I would encourage people to do it, because we need to tell the stories, and whether they're good stories, which I believe I focused on. I didn't want to focus on negative things. I think there was just too much negativity in the world today. And for me, I've always been about positivity and driving things that if you can't change, move on, but stuff that's positive. And yeah, I would encourage people to just get down and do it.
Should we spend 5 minutes on that controversial issue about the curriculum?
Oh, yes. So well, I don't even think it has to be 5 minutes, but my point, I think, with that is that, yes, there is content that you always need to learn, and content is part of it. I mean, content is a massive part of it. But if you are learning, if there are skills that are involved, that doesn't matter what the content is. Once you've got those skills, you can tackle any content. So I think what's critical is you need to teach the skills. And once you've got the skills, yes, the content will come as well. So I think that's my simple answer. So whether I teach the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, or whatever revolution it is, the content is there. That's not going to change. How I teach the interpretation skills, the analytical skills, the synthesizing skills, that is what's critical for the student to then be able to use those skills to analyze, to interpret any content that they are faced with. And so I think today's education must be more skills-based. It's got to be lifelong learning. I think that's a critical part. And it can't just be rote learning, because rote learning, I don't remember what, I can regurgitate information, but if I've got the skills to analyze, interpret, argue points, I think that's far more important. And we can disagree.
The Battle of Hastings.
The Battle of Hastings, who cares?
1066,
the point is,
Shaun.
That is of interest to you, but put arguments around the Battle of Hastings in terms of the strategic value, or what it did, or the effect that it had, and that becomes a very different thing. But I can just give you the rote learning on what it's about.
Angela wants to know where your book is available, and I think it's everywhere.
It is. So we were at Somerset Mall today, because we had come down, as I said, for some business tomorrow and Friday in the Western Cape. It's at all the exclusive books, so all good bookstores. You can go online to, if you would like me to sign a copy, which I would love to do. My website, shaunfuchs.co.za. That's ShaunFuchs.co.za. And you can order it online. We'll deliver it free of charge anywhere in Gauteng. It's a little bit more if it's somewhere else in South Africa, and I'd love to sign it for you. So, please just make a note of that, and that message will come directly through to me. So, yeah, that's where it's available.
Janine, why isn't my copy signed?
I'll answer that because we are still going to have a cup of coffee together, and then I'm going to sign it for you.
Ah, thank you, Shaun. It's so sweet. We'll have to invite Janine because without her, we would never have met. We're like Star Wars lovers.
I don't know if I want to. I don't know if I want to shout at Janine or praise her.
You better praise her because Janine and our relationship has to keep going because she needs to just feed this ever-hungry mill of authors and interesting people.
Stunning.
Shaun, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting. Are there any other questions for Shaun? Because I have absolutely monopolized the conversation. Kerry, didn't Kerry want to ask you a question? Where is she? Is she still in the room? And just let me check if she's here because Kerry O'Farrell, you and I had a conversation. You were going to ask Shaun something. I can't remember what it was. You're fascinating, Shaun. That was lovely. Good. What do you mean by fascinating? In what aspect is he fascinating? I mean, I know he is quite cute. Thank you. Love your positive attitude. Actually, you've maintained a positive attitude throughout your life, haven't you? There's very little that actually seems to have gotten you down, Shaun.
I have. I think I've tried to do that, and it's not always easy. I mean, I'm human, and things are tough, and but yeah, I think it's the choices you make and how you.
Where's Gordon?
He is in one of the other bedrooms. He's hiding. He should have already started cooking. I mean, you can't get good help nowadays.
I know.
28 years later, and I've still got to go and now probably cook after this interview.
After this intense interview, it's like you've broken out in a sweat and you're now exhausted. You should have actually come to introduce him to us. We like to meet the spouse.
Yeah, no, he wouldn't do that. He's very private. He's camera shy. We're totally opposite. But he's always been incredible in terms of support and in the background. And when I was headmaster, the kids loved him. He has an incredible relationship with my students and the staff. He's a wonderful human being.
Did you see that little video that's going around about the teacher that gave up teaching after 50 years or something? And she's leaving the school and the kids line the passages and they clap her all the way. I mean, just like hundreds of kids all the way to the car. I actually wanted to cry when I saw it. It was so moving. Little gray-haired teacher walking to a car.
I mean, that's incredible, and that's the power of teaching. You know, I've always used to say to teachers when I was head or when I was managing a group of schools that the tragedy of our profession is you never get to see your end product. I mean, that's just what was great about the book is I had so many past students from all my years of teaching come back and make contact again because word got out and who've bought the book and have just so that has been unbelievable for me.
Well, that's fantastic feedback, and it's nice to know that you did a good job and that there are fabulous people out there who can face the world because of you. Janine says, thanks so much, Mandi and Shaun. A coffee date sounds like a great idea. I think so too. You see, I can't read. It says good idea, and I just made it great. Kerry said, just got home. That was interesting. Love your energy vibes. And thank you. Love your positive attitude. Shaun, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you this evening. Thank you very much. Thank you, Janine. Thank you. That was interesting. Got the details on your book. Have a wonderful evening. Tell Gordon to feed you. And we look forward to chatting again. Enjoy the rest of that glass of wine. Thank you, everybody, and good night. Oh, before I let you go, hang on. Tomorrow night, we are doing something completely different. We are reading, no, we're not reading. We're chatting to Taryn Lee, author of The Secret Letters. This is a romance novel. So, frying pan fire. We've gone from mystical realism, magical realism, to memoir, to romance. Yes, and I read it. Would you believe? it was actually quite a nice treat after the harsh world that we live in. It's not my usual genre, but it was a lovely and delightful read, and you knew exactly how it was going to end. But Taryn's very nice, and we'll chat to her tomorrow evening. So same place, same time. Goodbye.
Enjoy.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.